A reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 10, beginning at verse 40. These are words of Jesus. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. The one who receives a prophet because he is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And the one who receives a righteous person because he is a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives one of these little ones even a cup of cold water because he is a disciple, truly I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. In the early 14th century, in 1336, a law was passed in this land, and it determined quite what you might or might not wear. There was a problem, you see. People were dressing in fine clothes, and as a result of that, other people looking at them thought, well, they must be important. They must be lords or ladies of the land, and therefore they would give them a certain authority. But they weren't. They were just wearing the clothes. And so this law was passed, as other laws were passed in other parts of Europe, which restricted what you could wear if you were of a certain social rank. Here's an extract. No knight under the estate of a lord, esquire or gentleman, nor any other person shall wear any shoes or boots having spikes or points which exceed the length of 2 inches, under the forfeiture of 40 pence. So, if you wore the shoes with over pointy toes, you might be fined unless you were a lord, esquire or gentleman. You needed to be careful what you wore. And so there were all sorts of law, many other things. If you were the wife of a labourer, you couldn't wear a girdle with silver decoration. If you had a doublet decorated with purple silk, well, you'd better be a member of the royal family, otherwise you were in serious trouble. Now, we don't have those sorts of laws anymore, but we do have uniforms, and uniforms also say something about the person wearing them. Or rather, they say something about the authority that that person might have. If you drive past somebody in a McDonald's uniform by the side of the road, you wouldn't pay much attention to them. You'd assume they were just walking to work. But if you drove past a policeman and that policeman had his hand up, well, you'd stop straight away. It could be the same person wearing a different uniform, but the fact of the matter is that the policeman with his uniform on, he now represents all the authority of the king, of the state, and so you stop. You can tell something about a person's authority by the uniform that they are wearing. Or if an ambassador goes into some great gathering overseas, well, that ambassador is received as if that ambassador was the state that they're representing, whether the parliament or whether the monarch, depending on that state. In other words, these uniforms are important things. They say something important about us. And when I stop for a policeman, yes, I respect the person, but really, more importantly, I respect the uniform and all that it represents. So it is with this passage. Jesus is saying that if any of his disciples are received in his name, it's as if the person receiving them is receiving Christ. Elsewhere, Paul talks of Christians as ambassadors for Christ. And so if anyone receives a Christian because they are a Christian, it's as if they receive Christ themselves. If anyone listens to a prophet, Jesus says, well, it's because that prophet is speaking words from God. You're not really receiving that person, but the words from God. Or a righteous person, somebody whose life echoes out the life of God. You're receiving them not because of that person themselves, but because of their righteousness, because of their godlikeness. And that raises an important question. How do you know? How do you know if somebody who stands up in the pulpit and preaches to you, how do you know whether they're actually preaching words of God or just their own blessed thoughts? What is their authority? Is it God's authority, or are they simply making it up as they go along? Well, we know from the scriptures that God is eternal. The very name of God is I am. God is eternally the same. Malachi makes this clear. God says through Malachi, "For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed." We find a similar passage in James, emphasizing the changelessness of God. So in James 1:17 we read, "Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change." So one way to tell whether a person really is speaking on God's behalf is not to look at their uniform, but actually to hold up their teachings to the words of God we find in the Bible. The Bible is changeless. God is changeless. Therefore, the teachings are changeless. So you can tell if somebody is speaking on behalf of God by seeing whether their words match up to what we find revealed to us in the Scriptures. It's a ready reckoner. It's a tool by which we can assess and weigh the words of other people. Charles Spurgeon, the great Victorian preacher, said of John Bunyan, the great 17th century preacher, that if you pricked him, his blood was bibline. What he meant by that funny phrase is that Bunyan's teachings were so saturated with the words of the Bible that it was as if it almost flowed through his veins, that his blood was bibline, it contained Bible. That's how you can tell whether somebody is speaking truly from God. Is their blood bibline? Don't rely on their clothing. Don't rely on the fact they may be standing up and wearing cassock and surplice and all the other fineries of the Church of England. The simple question is their blood bibline?